Hello, and welcome to this video where I will focus on giving you some suggestions and tips on writing chapter 3, the methodology. So uh, keep this in mind for this whole chapter, this chapter 3. You need to, at all points, be transparent on what you have done. So say we did this, and also to justify why you did it like that. So basically, we did this because it makes sense, because it's the best choice. And I will give you some tips on how to justify all of them. So, but keep that in mind for everything. As usual, the structure that I gave you is divided in different subsections, so it makes it easier to discuss things that are needed to be discussed. And we start with 3.1, which is a research philosophy. If you couldn't come to that lecture, or if you don't remember a lot of it, you are welcome to go back to the pre-recorded lecture. I think it's lecture number 2. It's very important that you understand these things because they're a bit confusing. Ontology, epistemology are a bit confusing. So maybe if you don't remember, it doesn't sound what I say, maybe you can go back to that pre-recorded lecture. Otherwise, it can be a bit confusing. So for all of you, you have the same philosophical assumptions. You are doing the same kind of study approach, like you are doing one quantitative and one qualitative study in the same project. So because of that, you are in between the subjective and the objective aspects of research philosophy. You are not totally objective, but you are not totally subjective, you are in between. So when you discuss ontology and epistemology, discuss that ontologically. You want to study a reality that is on one way socially constructed, rich in interpretations, but also it can be quantified. That's why you are doing this, the interviews and the survey, because you want to quantify something to make it objective, but at the same point, it's open to a lot of interpretation and understanding. It's subjective. So regarding ontology, discuss that. Regarding epistemology, the same thing. To understand this topic, you need to construct knowledge that can be quantifiable at some degree. That's why you have the statistics and all of this, but also you have knowledge that is rich in understanding and interpretations. That's why you did the interviews. Then I am giving you the answer to the next part. What are the methodological choices and your methodology? It's that a mixed methodology where you have the use of surveys and statistical analysis, and on the other hand, you have interviews and the thematic analysis in the qualitative side. Finally, the approach that you all have, this applies for everyone. You have an abductive approach. Again, if you don't remember this concept, go back to the lecture, please, so that you remember. So the abductive approach, remember, is always staying in between the theory and reality. So that's what you are doing. You start from a preconceived model based on theory, and then you go and test it quantitatively. Then that informs your interviews, and then with the interviews that you made, you kind of come back to the theory. It's like a process of going back and forth and back. Remember, if this sounds very confusing to you, you probably need to watch or rewatch the lecture on research philosophy. And I think this 3.1 is good enough with only one paragraph. You don't need a lot. So maybe you need like 2 sentences to state what are your assumptions, ontological assumptions, epistemological assumptions. Why did you choose these methods? Why is it coherent, your assumptions with your methods? And what is your approach? Remember, in the end, all of this research philosophy is about showing coherence. That's again, one paragraph or maybe 2, it's okay. You don't need a lot. Then we move to data collection, and I think this is maybe the largest section of this chapter because there are many things to discuss. First of all, I suggest that you divide these sections into parts, one for the quantitative data collection and another for the qualitative, as it's explaining here. And I will start with the quantitative because there's something important to discuss. So in one paragraph, I suggest that you talk about how you collected the data, how you constructed the survey, how did you distribute it, uh, here be transparent as what we did. Like the survey is based on previous research. We did it in the workshop all together. Your teacher put it all together in one single survey, and then you distributed it online with people that you might know, and also people in the classroom answered to it. So explain that. Also in that same paragraph, discuss this about your sample and your population. So your population, who do you want to study, is basically university students in Sweden. So that's your population. You want to understand this group of people, university students in Sweden. And your sample consists of 118 university students in Sweden. Does it make sense? Is it a good fit? Is it coherent? Discuss that in there. Again, maybe you need one paragraph just to discuss that. And before I move to the next, I need you to add something very specific. I need to change that. So one paragraph discussing this plus this other thing. I need to share something different. I prepared this document. You will have it in Canvas, where first of all, I have a example paragraph of what you need to write. Because in that section, in the data collection in 3.2, you need to show uh, which questions did you use to collect the quantitative data. It's very important that you discuss, you are very transparent on this. In the qualitative, you are more flexible. You know that you already did the workshop. You have the flexibility to propose your own questions. But in quant, you have to be more strict. That's why we had workshop 1. So what you need to add, besides that paragraph that I just explained, you also need to include this other part, this section, is discussing each of your variables, especially the dependent and the independent variable. So discuss how did you measure your concept here? Again, I am following the same example as before, as if I am group 1. So I am focusing on happiness and financial stress. So you can copy paste this and just adapt it to your own variable. All the variables are here in this document. There is everything in there with all the references. So you can copy from there. But basically what this paragraph says is that whatever your variable is was measured using a scale that has been previously used. You remember that's very important for internal validity and external validity. It contained, I think for the dependent is 4 items, for the independent is 5 items. From the 10-point Likert scale, 1 was totally disagree, 10 totally agree. I think this applies for everyone. Then something important. Some of you have inverse coded variables. Maybe you remember this from workshop 3 when we did the cleaning of the data. Remember that the inverse coded questions had a dot at the end. That I explained that in the workshop. So remember, if you had a question with a dot in the end, like this one, these are inverse coded. You just have to say it here. So the last item of the happiness 4, is inverse coded. You just have to say it. And the last thing, we perform internal validity test using Cronbach alpha, and the outcome was above 0.6, thus making it a valid instrument. You remember we did this test. Another important thing for the sustainable consumer behavior, that was the only variable where we had a problem. Do you remember that? And in that variable, we had to remove question 3 because that was problematic. I think it led to a Cronbach alpha of like 0.4 or something like that. So we had to remove question 3. So very important for groups who are dealing with sustainable consumer behavior, you are actually removing this one. You are not using sustainable consumer behavior, but say it here. Say it like, we remove the third question because it was problematic and we ended up using only 3. So explain that's very important. So I will go back to the assignment instructions. So these 2 paragraphs with your dependent variable and independent variable needs to be added in here, right? In data collection, the quantitative part. And then we go back to 1 paragraph about how you collected the qualitative data. So explain again, be transparent. How did you build your questionnaire? You said we had a workshop where we did like brainstorming. We were inspired by previous literature. We started with a predefined model to come up with questions. So everything you did in the workshop with Victoria, and then also explain how you did your interviews. Were they online? Were they in person? How did you record them? All of this. How did you transcribe them? Did you use a software or did you do it by hand? Also, how did you find the right person? This is also very important. Some of you decided to interview only people who studied in Sweden because that was the population. But also, uh, people decided to, in some groups, interview people not from Sweden to contrast. So why did you decide to do it like that? Explain it in here. And again, also try to justify why. Not only say like, we also interview people from somewhere else, but also why. I think this part is only one paragraph. So the data collection section would be one paragraph explaining this. Again, being transparent, say what we did. I know I did a lot of things and you also did other things. The paragraph with the document that I sent you with the variables, and then one paragraph explaining this, right? Then we move to the data analysis. And in the data analysis, my suggestion is also to divide it in quant and qual. And in the quantitative part, there are mostly is what we did in workshop 3, the workshop with the videos. So you can explain step by step what we did, but in a general way, in a way like you can say like we coded the results in Excel first, so we removed the unnecessary questions. We changed the yes to 1 and 0. How did you code? Explain that in here. The same with the cleaning of the data is removing the questions that you didn't need it. I think also something important is that all the responses were useful, so you can also talk about it. And then explain how did you do the statistical analysis, which is basically using SPSS to do the descriptive statistics and the three models that you ended up doing. The model without controls, then with some controls, and then with many controls. So explain that again. I think you only need probably one paragraph for this. And then in the qual is the same, but with what you did with Victoria in the workshop, the qualitative analysis workshop. How did you code the transcripts? How did you analyze the codes? How did you structure your data? How did you find the relevant themes? Were there like more that you find them from the interviews, or did you relate them from previous literature? Discuss this in there. Again, I think you don't need a lot. You need probably one paragraph to discuss this. And as a suggestion, you can maybe include your data structure table as an appendix. But right, so this is about data analysis, probably 2 paragraphs. Then we need to discuss trustworthiness. Again, maybe this you need to go back to the lecture again. We had a lecture on trustworthiness. I think it's lecture 3. Because you need to explain in one paragraph. Again, I don't think you need a lot, and divide it for trustworthiness. One paragraph quant, one paragraph qual. So how did you demonstrate internal validity? Again, go back to the lecture I explained there, but internal validity is the Cronbach alpha. Do you remember we did that? You can also say that the model fit test that we did in the regression analysis is also a proof of internal validity. For external validity, discuss that all of our variables are borrowed from previous research. For reliability and objectivity, you can say that the database is available and it can be replicated because in the data analysis you show how you did it. Objectivity, you can say that it is not biased, like the survey is very clean and I don't know, like it's not inclined towards something. So discuss that in one paragraph. Similarly with qualitative research, it's just that the concepts change. Instead of internal credibility is credibility. Internal validity is credibility. Instead of external validity is transferability. I don't want to give the lecture in here, so if you don't remember, go back to that lecture. There are videos on that. Watch the videos and write how you demonstrate all of these things. Like you triangulated because when you did the interview, there were more than one people in there. When you coded, there were more than one people doing the coding. You used well-known concepts from the literature to do your analysis. So several things that you can discuss in here. And again, you don't need a lot. You need like one paragraph is enough. And finally, one paragraph. I think you only need one paragraph for ethical concerns. So something very important is how you gain consent. So I think in the survey, it's very clear you gain consent with the first question from the survey. It was, do you give consent? Do you want to participate? Blah, blah, blah. And then they say yes. So say that everyone say yes, they agreed. In the interview, you probably ask them on voice, and maybe you recorded this, or probably you give them a piece of paper and then they sign it. However you did it, talk about it. Also talk about how you handle the data. It is a bit tricky because the quantitative data, I handle the data and then I share it to you in Canvas. So discuss that in there also, like you can say like the teacher took care of it, taking care of GDPR standards, and then we share it in Canvas and only people involved in here can take it. Anonymity is very important because in the survey, everyone is anonymous. There is no way to know who answered what. And in the interview, I believe from taking a look at your transcripts, also everyone was anonymized. So please also talk about it in this paragraph, like how did you make them anonymized? Why being anonymous was important, and how that doesn't reduce your trustworthiness by making them anonymous. So one paragraph with ethical reflections. So I know this chapter is a bit long, but that's the core of the course, the methodology. So I hope that with this it will be helpful for you to write. But if you have questions, let me know, and then I can answer to any of what you have.